A lonely widow bought orphans nobody wanted, and what happened next will leave you speechless. Is it possible to save them, or will they destroy her? Grace Bennett sat quietly at the corner of her small art gallery in Masonville, Texas, staring at the walls her late husband, Nathan, had once dreamt of filling with his collection of rare paintings. Now, everything in the gallery felt like an echo of what had been lost. 2 years had passed since Nathan's sudden heart attack, 2 years since her life had changed forever. At 47, Grace was no longer the vibrant woman she used to be. The once energetic woman who hosted gallery events, filled with laughter and warmth, had faded into someone who barely left her home. The weight of loneliness was unbearable, yet there was no way to escape it. She lived in a town where everyone knew her, but never quite saw her. The people in Masonville respected her, yet no one knew the grief that consumed her every moment. A phone call snapped her out of her thoughts. It was an invitation to an orphanage fundraiser in Riverside, a town 30 minutes away. Maybe it'll give me some purpose, she thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fill the void she was carrying. The fundraiser was in full swing when Grace arrived. The room was filled with cheerful chatter, but Grace couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. She wandered around, glancing at the smiling families, the children dressed in neat clothes, all brimming with hope. But then she noticed them, the children nobody was paying attention to. They were seated in the corner of the room, huddled together, their faces filled with longing that Grace couldn't ignore. Devin, Emma, Timmy, and Lily. 4 siblings whose names were hardly known in the room. There was no one coming up to greet them, no one offering them warm smiles or sweet words. They were a stark contrast to the other children. Their eyes were wide and full of a sadness that Grace couldn't ignore. Why is no one talking to them? Grace found herself asking. The organizer of the event, Patricia Ford, briefly explained. They've been overlooked, I'm afraid. No one's shown much interest. Too much baggage. Too many complications. Complications? Grace didn't understand. But something inside her stirred, a fierce empathy that made her heart ache for these children. Grace stepped forward and met their eyes. Devin's intense gaze, Emma's quiet, fearful expression, Timmy's fidgety hands, and Lily's wide eyes that seemed to plead for something only Grace could understand. Without thinking, Grace approached Patricia. I want to sponsor them, all 4 of them. I'll give them a home. Patricia blinked in surprise, but there was a hesitation in her voice. Are you sure, Grace? It's not just a decision about them being orphans. Their past is complicated. I don't care. Grace interrupted, the words flowing out before she could process them. They deserve a chance. I'll give them one. As Grace drove back home, the weight of her decision started to sink in. The excitement of the moment faded, replaced with uncertainty. What had I done? Her thoughts raced. What did I really know about these children? About their past? And about the warning Patricia had given me about them? Maybe I shouldn't have done this, Grace thought, her hands gripping the steering wheel. But the seeds of doubt began to sprout. What if I wasn't strong enough to take on this responsibility? Could I give them the love and care they needed? Or was I just repeating the same mistake of trying to fill a void inside my own heart? As she pulled up to her house, the silence of her empty home greeted her. It had been a while since she'd felt a sense of purpose like this, like her life had a direction again. But there was something else too, a sense of dread. The next few days were a whirlwind. Grace scrambled to prepare her home for the children, setting up beds and organizing rooms. But during her preparations, she found something strange. While moving furniture in the attic, Grace discovered an old box wedged between the beams. Inside were letters, yellowed with age. They were from someone named Ruth Miller, written years ago, long before Grace had moved into the house. The letters were addressed to someone named John, a name that didn't ring any bells. Curious, Grace read the letters, her heart sinking with each word. They detailed events that seemed to point to something much darker than just an old house. There were references to strange occurrences, unexplained fears, and warnings about children. "Do not let them discover the truth. They are not what you think. It will be their undoing," one letter read. A chill ran down Grace's spine. What truth? And why was Ruth Miller so insistent on hiding it? The days that followed were filled with unease. Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she had walked into something much bigger than she could have imagined. The children were due to arrive soon, but there was still so much about them that Grace didn't know. The warning from Patricia echoed in her mind. These children had a history that no one spoke about, a history that might have followed them here. What do you think, viewers? What would you do in Grace's shoes? Would you open your heart to these children, knowing what you know now? Comment below and let us know your thoughts. The day the children arrived was the first day Grace would truly face what she had taken on. The moment the doorbell rang, she felt a pang of dread, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. She opened the door to see the 4 children standing there, holding only small bags of their belongings. The youngest, Lily, hesitated at the doorway, clutching Timmy's hand. "Welcome to your new home," Grace said softly, though her voice barely hid the uncertainty in her heart. As they stepped inside, the air in the house seemed to shift. There was an unsettling energy, a tension that Grace couldn't shake. The children were silent, but there was something in their eyes, something she couldn't yet understand. Then Devin, the oldest, spoke for the first time since he arrived. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a heavy weight. "This house has secrets, and so do we." The words sent a shockwave through Grace. What did he mean? Was this just a child's imagination, or was there more to their past than she could possibly understand? "The truth," Devin muttered, "will come out, and when it does, everything will change." What's going to happen next? Why does Devin say the truth will change everything? Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the shocking twist. The first night the children spent in Grace's home was one of silence. As they stood in the foyer, their bags clutched tightly in their small hands, Grace noticed the heaviness in the air. The house seemed to swallow the sound of their footsteps as they moved through the rooms. Grace had set up the bedrooms with soft blankets and toys, hoping to give them comfort. But nothing she did could mask the tension that loomed over them. Devin, the oldest, who at 13 was already carrying a burden far beyond his years, took charge of the younger ones, guiding them quietly to their rooms. There was an unease in the way he moved, his posture rigid, his eyes darting around the house as though he was waiting for something or someone. Grace watched as the children settled in. Emma, who was 10, pulled the covers tightly around herself, her eyes scanning the room like she expected something to leap out at her. Timmy, 7, fidgeted with his fingers and whispered something to Lily, who simply stared at the wall with an eerie calm. The house had seemed so much quieter with Nathan gone, but now, with the children here, it felt almost suffocating. Grace tried to push aside the thought that had been nagging at her since the fundraiser. Had she done the right thing? Was this really the fresh start she had hoped for? As the night wore on, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house. She thought she heard something. Whispers, soft and barely audible, like the sound of distant footsteps. Her mind wandered back to the letters she had found, the cryptic words of Ruth Miller, the strange mention of a curse, and the warning not to let the children discover the truth. What was Ruth's connection to this house? And why had Patricia, the orphanage director, been so hesitant about the children? Unable to shake the feeling of unease, Grace decided to check on the children. She made her way down the long hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath her. The door to Devin's room was slightly ajar. Grace paused, unsure if she should knock or just leave him to sleep. But then she heard it. A voice. "I don't belong here." The words were soft but filled with a sorrow Grace couldn't ignore. She pushed the door open and saw Devin sitting on his bed, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Devin, are you okay?" she asked gently, stepping into the room. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes flickered nervously toward the window, then back to Grace. "I don't know what's going to happen here," he said almost to himself. "This place, it's not safe." Grace's heart skipped a beat. The warning, the house, Devin's unsettling words. "I don't want to scare you, but I think something's following us." Grace's chest tightened. "Something's following us?" She tried to reassure him, though the knot in her stomach tightened. "You're safe here, Devin. No one is going to hurt you. I'll protect you." But even as she said it, the words felt hollow. She wasn't sure she believed them herself. The next few days were filled with awkward silences and hesitant glances. The children had settled into their new routine, but there was an unmistakable distance between them and Grace. They were polite, but their interactions were guarded, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Grace began to notice strange occurrences around the house. The lights flickered at odd times, and the temperature would suddenly drop in certain rooms, especially the hallway near the old attic door. She couldn't ignore it. The house seemed to be alive in a way she couldn't explain. One morning, Grace woke up from a disturbing dream. She had been walking through the house, searching for the children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called out their names, her voice echoing through the empty hallways, but there was no answer. Then, she reached the attic door, and a figure appeared in the shadows. Long, dark hair, pale skin. Grace jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. The next day, Grace felt a sense of urgency. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She knew she had to find out more about the house, about Ruth Miller, the previous owner, and the strange history she'd uncovered. Grace went to the local library in Riverside, hoping to find more information about Ruth Miller. As she browsed through old records and newspaper clippings, she learned that Ruth had been a prominent figure in the town. She was wealthy, influential, and connected to powerful people in the community. But her disappearance? That was shrouded in mystery. Grace met with an elderly librarian, Marge Whitaker, who seemed to know more than she was willing to share. "People don't like to talk about Ruth," Marge said in a low voice. "She had her hands in a lot of things people don't like to remember." Grace leaned in closer, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of things?" Marge hesitated, glancing around the library as if to make sure no one was listening. "Some people say Ruth was involved in a cult, a group that believed in controlling children's destinies. There were rumors about how she tried to adopt children, but it was always a little too convenient. I wouldn't trust anything tied to Ruth Miller, Miss Bennett." Grace's mind raced. Controlling children's destinies? That night, Grace decided to confront the children. She needed answers. She sat them down in the living room, the warmth of the fireplace flickering in their faces. "Listen," Grace said, her voice soft but firm. "I've been doing some research, and I need you to tell me what you know about Ruth Miller." Devin's eyes went wide. "You shouldn't have asked them," he said, shaking his head. "You won't like the answer." Emma and Timmy exchanged uneasy glances. Lily remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Why?" asked Grace, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you know? What's the truth?" Devin stood up suddenly, his voice shaky. "We don't remember everything, but we know Ruth was always watching. She'd show up at the orphanage, watching us. We thought she was just a visitor, but there was something about her. Something off." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Devin continued, his voice barely a whisper. "She said we were chosen, that we were part of something bigger, something that would change everything." Grace's stomach turned. Chosen? Part of something bigger? As Grace tried to process what Devin had said, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they didn't make sense. Why had Ruth Miller chosen these children? Why had she been involved in their lives? And what was the connection to the inheritance, the cult, and the strange happenings around the house? Grace stood up abruptly, trying to steady herself. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "What does it all mean?" Before Devon could answer, the house suddenly went silent. The lights flickered, and the air turned cold. Then, the phone rang. Grace froze. The number on the caller ID was unknown, but something in her gut told her to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaky. A deep, ominous voice replied, "Leave the house now, Grace, before it's too late." The line went dead. What do you think? Should Grace listen to the warning or stay and uncover the truth? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the next shocking chapter. Things are about to get even darker. It had been a week since the children arrived in Grace's home, and already things felt off. At first, the house had felt too quiet, just a shell of what it had been before. But now, it was as though the walls themselves were watching her. The children were still distant, withdrawn into themselves. Devin would disappear for hours at a time, always coming back with that same look in his eyes, like he was lost in some private world. Emma, Timmy, and Lily kept to themselves mostly, playing quietly but never laughing, never talking. Grace could never quite shake the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface. Then, the strange occurrences started. One night, Grace woke to find the kitchen lights flickering on and off. She assumed it was just the wiring acting up, but when she entered the kitchen, everything was in order. The light was on, but there was no sign of what might have triggered it. She shrugged it off and went back to bed, but the next night, the same thing happened. And this time, there was a low whispering sound in the kitchen. Too faint for her to make out the words, but clear enough to make her blood run cold. She told herself it was nothing, that she was just imagining things. But when she entered the kitchen the following morning, she found a glass that she was certain she had not left on the counter, its contents spilled on the floor. And then there was the cold spot in the hallway near the attic door, the door she had never been able to open. No matter how warm the rest of the house was, that spot remained icy cold, like the chill of a forgotten grave. Grace began to notice the children's reactions to the strange happenings. They never acknowledged the whispers, the flickering lights, or the cold spots, but their behavior started to change. Devin became even more withdrawn, spending hours in his room, staring at the wall. Emma started having nightmares, waking up screaming, her small body trembling as if she had seen something she couldn't explain. Lily had begun to speak more, but it wasn't the sweet, innocent speech of a 5-year-old. She often muttered things under her breath that made no sense. Timmy, the youngest, was the most affected. He became quiet, refusing to eat, his little hands constantly wringing together. At first, Grace had attributed this to the stress of the move, but now it seemed as though something far deeper was at play. One evening, Grace was walking through the hallway when she heard Timmy's voice. She peeked into his room and saw him standing in front of the window, staring out into the dark backyard. "What's wrong, Timmy?" she asked gently. Timmy didn't answer at first, his wide eyes fixed on something outside. Finally, he turned to her, his face pale, his lips trembling. "There's someone out there," he whispered. "A lady with a white dress. She's been standing by the tree, watching." Grace felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had been feeling the same unsettling presence, but hearing it from Timmy sent a wave of dread through her. A lady in a white dress? Before she could ask him more, Timmy turned away from her, his eyes locking onto something outside the window. "She's gone now," he said, as if nothing had happened, but she was there. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept hearing whispers, faint but persistent, coming from the attic. She hadn't been up there since she'd moved in, and part of her wondered if she should leave it that way. But something compelled her to go upstairs to see if she could figure out what was happening. She found the attic door, creaking open ever so slightly, as though inviting her in. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The air was thick, and temperature had dropped several degrees, making her breath visible in the cold. The attic was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the hallway. She moved cautiously toward the far corner where the box of letters had been, but before she could reach it, she heard a sound, a low whisper, then a scraping noise from behind her. Grace whipped around, her heart pounding. The door slammed shut behind her, locking her inside. She panicked, pounding against the door, but no matter how hard she tried, it wouldn't budge. "Help!" she cried, her voice hoarse. But the only response was the sound of whispering growing louder, the words just out of her reach. She turned to look around the attic,
her eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the whispers now, louder, now clearer. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the corner of her vision, standing just beyond the light. It was a woman, tall and thin, dressed in a white gown that seemed to shimmer in the darkness. Her face was obscured, but her eyes, she could see her eyes staring directly at her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the figure in the corner stepped closer. Grace stumbled backward, her hands trembling as she tried to reach for the door. The figure moved, faster than she could comprehend, until it was standing right in front of her. She gasped, backing up until her legs hit the edge of the attic stairs. "What do you want?" Grace demanded, her voice cracking. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it raised a hand, and Grace's heart stopped when she saw a ring on her finger, a ring that looked remarkably similar to one Grace had found in the box of letters.
Suddenly, everything clicked. The woman, the whispers, the strange occurrences, everything was tied to Ruth Miller, the woman who had lived in his house before, the woman who had tried to adopt the children, the woman who had left behind these strange, haunting traces of her presence. And now, it seemed Ruth Miller wasn't just a memory. She was a force, still lingering in the house, still haunting the children and Grace herself. Grace stumbled out of the attic, her legs unsteady, her mind reeling. She couldn't shake the image of the woman in white, or the feeling that Ruth Miller was watching her every move. She immediately called Patricia Ford, desperate for answers. When Patricia picked up, Grace wasted no time. "Ruth Miller isn't gone, is she?" Grace's voice was shaky. "She's still here, isn't she?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Patricia sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out. But it's true. Ruth's influence is still here. She's tied to that house in a way no one can explain, and those children, those poor children, are the key. They've been carrying her curse all along." "Cursed," Grace echoed, disbelief in her voice. "What do you mean?" Patricia hesitated. "Ruth's obsession with those kids went beyond love. She wanted control. She wanted power. And she used everything, every last breath, to make sure they were hers. Now, it's up to you to decide if you're willing to face what she left behind." Grace hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Patricia's words echoed in her mind. Ruth Miller's influence is still here. Was this some kind of twisted game? Was she being manipulated by a ghost? Or was there something darker at play? She needed to protect the children, but she couldn't shake the feeling that by trying to help them, she was only leading them and herself deeper into danger. That night, she gathered the children in the living room, her heart heavy. She needed to know if they were ready to face the truth. Devin looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "We have to face it, don't we? We have to face her?" Grace swallowed hard. "Yes, we do. But I'll protect you. We'll do this together." But as she said the words, she knew that it wasn't just the children who needed protection. She needed to protect herself, too. What do you think is going on in that house? Do you believe Ruth Miller's ghost is still haunting them, or is something more sinister at play? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to find out what happens next, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming. Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she was in over her head. The warnings, the strange woman in white, and the eerie atmosphere surrounding the house were beginning to take a toll on her mental state. But one thing kept gnawing at her. What was Ruth Miller's real connection to these children? Why had she gone to such extremes to manipulate their lives? Desperate for answers, Grace decided to dig deeper into Ruth Miller's past. She had already learned some unsettling details about Ruth's life from the library, but now she needed more. There had to be something buried in this town's history, something that connected Ruth to the house and the children. Grace visited Riverside's local archives early the next morning, hoping to find something that might shine a light on the mysterious woman who seemed to haunt her every thought. As she flipped through old records and documents, one name kept appearing: Eleanor Clark, Ruth Miller's long-lost friend. The records indicated that Eleanor and Ruth had been inseparable for years, but their relationship seemed to have ended abruptly. There was no clear reason why, but Grace could feel it, the tension in the air. She continued scanning the old newspapers, and then she found it. A story from Riverside's Courier-Journal, dated back nearly 30 years. The headline read, "Local businesswoman Ruth Miller missing, presumed dead after mysterious disappearance." The article described how Ruth had vanished from her home, leaving behind only a few cryptic letters and no trace of where she had gone. There was mention of an inheritance dispute that had left Ruth at odds with a number of wealthy families in the area. The piece hinted that Ruth had become entangled in something much darker, something that involved children, inheritance, and a powerful group of people.
As Grace entered the house, she was met with silence. The children were nowhere to be found. She checked the kitchen, the living room, and their rooms, but no one was there. Panic began to set in. Where had they gone? Had something happened to them? She grabbed her phone, dialing Devon's number. It went straight to voicemail. Her chest tightened. Then, as if on cue, the front door creaked open. Grace rushed to the door, her heart pounding, only to find the children standing there as if they had never left. "What are you doing?" Grace asked, her voice shaky. "We're just outside," Devon said quietly. "We thought you'd be worried, but we're fine." There was something odd about the way Devon said it, like he was hiding something. "What's going on, Devon?" Grace pressed. "Where did you go? You didn't tell me you were leaving." "We just needed some air," Devon said, his eyes avoiding hers. Grace wasn't sure if she believed him. The children's behavior had been getting more and more erratic. There was something they weren't telling her, something they were hiding. Later that evening, Grace couldn't get the thought of the children's strange behavior out of her head. She had to know what they were hiding. That's when she remembered something that had been bothering her from the moment she first moved into the house. There was an old painting in the living room, one that had been left behind by the previous owners. The portrait depicted a man and a woman, both dressed in old-fashioned clothing, standing before a grand estate. Grace had always assumed it was just a decoration, but now, after everything she had learned, she couldn't ignore it. She approached the painting and examined it more closely. The woman in the painting looked strikingly similar to Ruth Miller, but it was more than just the resemblance. There was a sense of familiarity in the woman's eyes that seemed to stare back at Grace with a knowing, almost unsettling gaze. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. She'd seen those eyes before in the attic. The woman in the white dress, the one who had been standing outside her window. It was Ruth Miller. But how was that possible? The woman in the painting had died years ago. Then she noticed something in the background of the painting, a large sprawling estate with a towering oak tree. The very same oak tree she had seen outside her window, the one the children had described as the spot where the lady in white had stood. Grace's breath caught in her throat. The house wasn't just any house. It was the house, the one from the portrait, the one Ruth Miller had once called home. Grace knew now that she was not just living in a house, she was living in a legacy tied to Ruth Miller and her twisted obsession with controlling the lives of those around her. But why had Ruth chosen this house? Why had she left behind these cryptic clues and warnings? What had she been trying to tell her? Grace couldn't shake the thought that the house itself was somehow alive. The way it seemed to change from one moment to the next. The way it felt like something was lurking just around the corner. She had lived in this house long enough to know that it wasn't just the walls that carried history. It was the very air, the floorboards, the rooms. Everything seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't quite comprehend. And then there were the children. Were they simply victims of Ruth Miller's manipulation? Or were they part of something much larger? Could it be that they were the key to uncovering Ruth's hidden legacy, her twisted desire to control and possess? Grace felt herself being drawn deeper into this mystery, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had bitten off more than she could chew. Could she stop whatever Ruth had set in motion, or was she already too late? That night, after the children had gone to bed, Grace couldn't sleep. She wandered through the house, trying to shake the feeling of unease that seemed to hang in the air. The cold spot by the attic door was still there, waiting for her. The whispers, too, had started up again, this time louder, more insistent. Suddenly, she heard something she hadn't expected. The sound of footsteps in the attic, soft, deliberate steps, as if someone was pacing back and forth. Her heart raced as she approached the attic door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She hesitated for a moment, but then, without thinking, she threw the door open. The attic was empty, except for the faintest trace of dust on the floor, arranged in a pattern she couldn't make sense of. It was as though someone had been there, watching her every move, and now she realized she wasn't just a passive observer in this house, she was part of it, and whatever had happened here before was about to happen again.
To subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking chapter, the truth is closer than Grace thinks, and it might be more dangerous than anyone imagined. Grace couldn't sleep. The past few days had been a blur, her mind constantly churning with the revelations she'd uncovered. The house, Ruth Miller's cryptic legacy, the children, and the strange occurrences had created a web of deceit so tangled she couldn't tell where the lies began and the truth ended. She sat in her living room late that night, a cup of cold coffee in her hand, staring at the documents she had gathered. Ruth Miller's legacy was darker than anything Grace had imagined. Ruth had built her entire life on manipulation, twisting people's fates, including those of the children she had tried to adopt. And now Grace had inherited not only the house, but also the twisted plans Ruth had set into motion before her disappearance. Devon's warning echoed in her mind. Ruth is controlling us. Grace had dismissed it at first, but the more she learned, the more it made sense. The children weren't just victims, they were pawns in Ruth's sick game. But why? Why had Ruth chosen them? Why had she left them to Grace, a woman who was still grappling with the loss of her husband? The next morning, Grace decided to confront the children again. The whispers in the night, the strange behavior, they all had to mean something. She could no longer ignore it. Devon was the first to sit down with her. The others remained distant, as if they feared what would happen when the truth finally came to light. Devon, who had once been so quiet, now seemed like he was holding on to something, a secret he could no longer keep to himself. "Devon, I need you to be honest with me," Grace said, her voice soft but firm. "What's really going on? What do you know about Ruth Miller, about this house?" Devon looked up, his eyes filled with pain. "Ruth wasn't just a woman who wanted to adopt us. She wanted to control us. She used us. She made us believe we were special, chosen. But we were never her children. We were just tools. Tools for something darker." got wrapped up in something. Something dangerous. I didn't have the power to stop her, but I can help you stop it now." Grace's heart skipped. Help her stop it? What did that even mean? Could Eleanor be trusted? "What do you want from me?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "I want to help you break the cycle," Eleanor said, leaning forward. "I want to help you save the children. But you need to listen to me, Grace. There's a power here that you don't understand, and it's going to take everything you have to stop it." Eleanor's words lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Grace was no stranger to the weight of responsibility, but this was different. This wasn't just about caring for the children anymore. This was about stopping a force far beyond her understanding. The more Eleanor spoke, the more Grace realized that the stakes were much higher than she'd imagined. Ruth Miller hadn't just been a woman with a passion for children. She had been part of a network, a cult-like group that believed in controlling the fates of those who were chosen to inherit certain powers. And now, that power was in Grace's hands. Eleanor stood up, her expression solemn. "You can stop it, Grace, but you need to act quickly. The children, they are the key. But the truth? The truth is more dangerous than you know." Grace felt her chest tighten. "I don't know what to do anymore. I thought I was saving them, but now it feels like they were never meant to be saved." "You're not saving them," Eleanor said sharply. "You're stopping the inevitable. You're breaking the cycle. And you have to do it before Ruth's influence takes over completely." Grace stared at Eleanor, the weight of her words settling on her shoulders like a ton of bricks. The truth was out there, but it was a truth so dark, so twisted, that Grace wasn't sure she was ready to face it. "I'm not sure I can do this," Grace whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can face what Ruth left behind. I'm scared." Eleanor placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "You don't have a choice. But don't worry, Grace. You're not alone. And once you understand the truth, you'll see that you can stop it. You have the power to end this." Grace nodded slowly, her mind swirling with 1,000 questions. She had made a promise to the children, and she couldn't back down now. But this was no longer just about providing a home. It was about something far darker. And now she had to confront it. As Eleanor left, she turned to Grace one last time. "You know where to start. Don't waste time." What do you think is going to happen next? Can Grace stop the evil that Ruth Miller left behind? Or is it already too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you can follow Grace's journey to uncover the shocking truth. You won't want to miss what happens next. Chapter 6. The Truth Comes to Light. 2,200 words. Grace couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's visit. Everything Eleanor had said played on a loop in her mind. "You're not saving them, Grace. You're stopping the inevitable." The words were like a weight on her chest. Grace had assumed that by offering the children a home, she was giving them a chance at a better life. But now it seemed like they had been part of something much darker from the start. A curse. A plan. And now, Grace was trapped in the middle of it. That night, Grace lay in bed wide awake. She couldn't run from this anymore. She had to face the truth, the full, terrifying truth. But what did it mean for her future? Could she really break Ruth's hold over the children? And more importantly, could she stop whatever Ruth had planned for them all? The next day, Devon came to her. He hadn't spoken to her in days, keeping to himself in his room. But now, there was a new determination in his eyes, something different, something that spoke of a truth that he was ready to face. "Grace," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." She nodded, her heart pounding. This was it. She could sense the shift in the air. Devon was finally ready to tell her what had been hidden, locked away for so long. He sat down next to me on the couch, his hands clenched together, his face pale. "I've been having these dreams. I know I've told you about Ruth Miller, but what I didn't tell you is that the dreams, they feel real. Like I'm not just dreaming, but living through it. Grace's mind raced. What are you talking about? I'm seeing it all, Devin whispered. Ruth was part of something bigger than any of us can understand. She wasn't just controlling us for her own gain. There's a power at play here, Grace, and it's using us. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of power? What is it? Devin looked at her, his eyes full of fear. She believed in controlling fates, destinies, through rituals, through blood. We were part of those rituals. That's why Ruth wanted us. We weren't just her adopted children. We were something else entirely. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Grace's mind spun, struggling to keep up with the revelation. You're saying you were part of something supernatural? Grace asked, her voice shaking. Devin nodded, his face pale. We still are. The power Ruth sought didn't just die with her. It's in the house, and it's in us. Grace sat back, absorbing what Devin had just confessed. Ruth's manipulations were one thing, but to learn that they were part of a larger, darker plan, a plan that involved blood rituals, was something else entirely. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. So, you're saying that these rituals, these fates, they're tied to the house? To us? Grace asked, her voice trembling. Devin looked away, his eyes filled with regret. Yes, Ruth wanted to control everything. She believed that if she could control our destinies, she could gain immortality. But she was never supposed to die, not like that. Something went wrong. She was supposed to pass on the power to us, but after she disappeared, it left a hole, a void that's pulling us back in. Grace stood up, pacing the room. No, this doesn't make sense. If Ruth was trying to control you, then why would she leave everything behind? Why bring us into this? Why not just end it? Devin sighed. It wasn't about ending it, Grace. It was about continuing it. The power isn't something that just disappears. It needs someone to carry it forward. That's where we come in. Grace's heart raced. She couldn't process it all. The children were tied to this house, tied to a legacy of control, power, and dark rituals, and now she was caught in the middle of it. The answers Grace had been searching for were finally starting to form, but there was one last piece to the puzzle, one last terrifying realization. That night, she went into the attic again. This time, she wasn't just looking for answers. She was ready to confront whatever it was that Ruth had left behind. As she entered the attic, the cold air hit her like a wall. The atmosphere was thick, oppressive, as if something was watching her from the shadows. She stepped forward, moving toward the far corner where Ruth's box of letters had been stored. Grace reached for the box, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside, amidst the yellowed pages, was a letter addressed to the children. Her children now. Her heart stopped as she read the first line. To my dear ones, the time has come to pass on what is yours. The ritual will be complete, and your fate is sealed. You will inherit the legacy of this family. You will fulfill the destiny I've chosen for you. No one can break it, not even death itself. Grace's blood ran cold. Ruth had been planning this for them. The ritual wasn't just a part of Ruth's twisted plans, it was their future too. She continued reading, her eyes widening with every word. The power belongs to you now, my children. Embrace it. Don't fight it. It will be your strength. The last sentence stopped her in her tracks. This is not the end. This is the beginning of something far greater. Grace's breath caught in her throat. What had she gotten herself into?
Grace slammed the box shut, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the fact that Ruth had planned this from the beginning, or that the children had been a part of it all along. The letter spoke of power, of fate, of control. And now Grace had to decide, was she willing to risk everything to break the curse? Or was she doomed to become a part of Ruth's legacy, a legacy that might outlast them all? She couldn't live with the thought of the children being controlled. She couldn't let Ruth's influence continue. But how could she fight something so powerful, so deeply embedded in the very fabric of this house? The children were still in their rooms, oblivious to the full extent of what was happening. But Grace couldn't shield them from the truth any longer. They needed to know what Ruth had left behind. They needed to know what they were really up against. Grace went to each child, one by one, and sat them down. It was time. The truth had to come out. "I need you to listen to me," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos raging in her mind. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything. But you need to understand what's really happening here, what Ruth wanted from us, what we're all tied to." Devin, Emma, Timmy, and Lily all gathered around her, their eyes wide with fear. Grace could see the hesitation in their eyes, the fear of the unknown. But they needed to hear this. Ruth Miller had a plan for us. She believed she could control our fates, our lives, through dark rituals. And we're a part of that, whether we like it or not.
Devin looked away, his expression hardening. "I know," he whispered. "We've known all along. We've felt it." Grace's heart broke. They had always known. They had always been a part of Ruth's twisted legacy. "But we can stop this," Grace said firmly. "We can break the cycle. We have to." What do you think will happen next? Can Grace stop Ruth's influence and save the children from their destiny? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the next chapter. The truth is getting darker, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The air in the house was thick, charged with an energy Grace couldn't shake. Every room felt alive, as if something was waiting, watching. The moment of truth had come. Grace had made up her mind. She couldn't let Ruth Miller's twisted legacy continue to control the children. She couldn't let the dark power that had haunted them all consume them any longer. But she knew that confronting Ruth's influence wouldn't be easy. In fact, it might be impossible. Every step she'd taken had led her to this point, but the path ahead was clouded with uncertainty. One thing was clear, though. She had to break free of the cycle. For herself, for the children, for their future. Devin had warned her that Ruth's power wasn't just bound to the house, it was tied to them, to the very essence of their being. But Grace wasn't ready to accept that. She couldn't. If there was a way to stop it, she would find it. The children had gone to bed early that night, each of them lost in their own world. Grace had insisted on no more secrets, no more avoiding the truth. She had told them everything she knew, every horrible detail about Ruth's plans, and now they were all going to face what was coming together. Grace had been expecting a confrontation with Ruth's lingering presence, but she hadn't expected Eleanor Clark to come back. The doorbell rang just as Grace was preparing to gather the children in the living room. She opened the door, her pulse quickening when she saw Eleanor standing there, eyes wide with urgency. "You came back," Grace said, her voice steady despite the surprise. "Why are you here?" Eleanor stepped inside, glancing nervously around. "You don't understand, Grace. The truth is worse than I thought. It's not just Ruth. There's someone else involved." Grace felt her stomach tighten. Who? Who else could possibly be involved? Eleanor hesitated. "Ruth was just the start. There's another force. Someone who's been watching us all from the shadows. Someone who's been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. I didn't want to tell you this, but You need to know." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. "Who? Just tell me." Eleanor took a deep breath. "It's me," she said, her voice low. "I've been working with Ruth. I've been part of the plan all along." Grace's mind raced. Eleanor working with Ruth? The woman who had claimed to help her now confessed to being part of the very thing she had feared all along? "I was trying to protect you," Eleanor continued, "but now it's clear that this cycle needs to end. Ruth's influence is spreading, and it's only a matter of time before it's too late." Grace felt like the ground was slipping out from under her. Eleanor wasn't the ally she had thought she was. She had been part of Ruth's plan all along. But why had she come now? What had changed? Eleanor was pacing, her hands clenched into fists. The ritual Ruth planned wasn't just about power, it was about control. The moment the children stepped into this house, they became part of it, part of a legacy that would continue through them, through their children and beyond. That's what Ruth wanted, to create an unbreakable chain. Grace's breath caught in her throat. So the children, they were never just orphans to be saved? They were part of this plan all along. Eleanor nodded, her face full of regret. Yes, but that's not all. Ruth was never meant to be the one who inherited the power. It was supposed to be the children. They are the ones who will carry the legacy forward, and you, Grace, were meant to facilitate it. You were supposed to protect them, but not just protect them, you were meant to keep the power flowing, to help them fulfill the ritual. Grace stood frozen, her mind reeling. Ruth Miller's plan was more insidious than she had ever imagined. The children were caught in the middle of a power struggle they couldn't even begin to understand. And Grace had been lured into it, unwittingly playing a part in a deadly game.
The ritual had begun, whether Grace liked it or not. She had to confront this darkness head on. But how? "What do I need to do?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor looked at her, her expression grim. "There's one way to end this. You need to sever the link. You need to break the chain that ties the children to Ruth. The only way to do that is to confront the source, to face the power that Ruth left behind in the house." Grace felt a surge of fear and determination. How? Eleanor stepped forward, placing a hand on Grace's arm. "There's a ritual. It's dangerous. It may not work. But if you can get the children to face it, if you can show them the truth, they will be free." The children gathered in the living room, their faces pale with worry. Grace could see the fear in their eyes, the confusion. They had felt something building too, something they couldn't explain. It was time for the truth to come out. Grace stood in front of them, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're going to face this together. There are no more secrets. We're going to break this curse once and for all." The room was heavy with tension as Grace explained what Eleanor had told her. She told the children about Ruth's legacy, about the rituals and the power that had been left behind. She told them about the choice they had to make, to fight back or let the curse claim them. "I don't want this," Devon said, his voice cracking. "I never asked for this. None of us did." Grace looked at him, her eyes full of empathy. "I know, but we don't have a choice. We can stop this. We can stop Ruth's influence from controlling our lives. We're going to face it together. You're not alone." The children nodded, some with tears in their eyes, but there was something else there, something stronger than fear. There was hope. Grace turned to Eleanor. "Let's do it. We can end this." Eleanor nodded, and together they all moved toward the attic. The attic door creaked open, and the temperature dropped sharply. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and grow, reaching out to them as if the house itself was alive. But Grace wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced the darkness within herself, and now she was ready to fight back. Eleanor stood beside her, and the children stood behind them. The room was eerily silent, save for the soft whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Grace raised her hands, ready to perform the ritual that would break the curse. She spoke the words Eleanor had given her, and as she did, a surge of energy filled the room, cold, overwhelming, but also powerful. The house seemed to tremble around them as if it was resisting the change. Suddenly, the figure of Ruth Miller appeared before them, her face contorted with anger. "No!" Ruth's voice echoed as if coming from all directions. "You cannot break this! You cannot escape what is yours!" But Grace stood firm, her resolve unwavering. "We are not yours. We are free." The house shook violently, the walls rattling, as Ruth's figure began to dissipate, fading into the air like smoke. The whispers grew louder, then abruptly stopped. The house fell silent. Did Grace succeed in breaking the curse, or is the darkness still lurking within the house? What do you think will happen to the children now that they're free from Ruth's influence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you can follow the next chapter of Grace's journey. You won't want to miss what happens next.